Commerce and trade are part of the DNA of the people of the Levant, as we have just seen in that beautiful video. The natural equilibrium of the Levantine region throughout its history has been one where goods, people, and services have traveled freely over borders with the added advantage of the blending of cultures and the tradition of tolerance. This vision of integration may seem out of place or out of step given the events today, given the struggles and conflict of the region. But let me propose that a different way of looking at it, that it is the present that is out of step and out of place with the glorious past of the Levant. And the present situation is a detour on the road to reestablishing that natural equilibrium that leads to economic integration. In this discussion, we're not naive or have any illusions about the role of security, governance, and politics in this journey, but on the journey to security requires a journey to prosperity, and to get on that road, you need a vision. As New Levant Initiative founder Jamal Daniel wrote in his seminal article, Reinventing the Levant, let me quote, "There is a yearning for a more organic solution, one in which the governments and the people of the region have equal stakes. And indeed, there is a model rooted in the region's history that could be a solution." And our role here today, at this conference and on this panel, is to better understand how this organic solution of economic integration, rooted in the region's history, will and can benefit the people and governance of the region. So to address that question, we have a truly distinguished panel today. I'm going to take a minute to read their bios, just so you all know who's here. Abdullah El-Dardari, I'm starting with, has a wealth of experience, is well known for his innovative work. Since February 2017, he has been a senior advisor on reconstruction in the Office of the Vice President, Middle East and North Africa region at the World Bank. Prior to that, in 2011, he had joined the United Nations Economics and Social Commission for Western Asia, or EXQUA, where he became Deputy Executive Secretary in 2014. He also has a distinguished career in Syria, where he served as the Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs from 2005 to 2011. Immediately to my right is Isabel Kalajzich. She is a senior country economist with the World Bank, where she works in the global practice for macroeconomics, trade, and investment. She provides policy advice to governments in the area of economic policy, trade, competitiveness, and public spending efficiency. More importantly, she literally wrote the book on economic integration in the Levant as the lead author of the groundbreaking report, Over the Horizon, A New Levant, which we'll be talking about today, and which proposes comprehensive economic, social, and development reforms and multi-country investment projects to benefit from significant untapped potential in the region. And then on the far right, my colleague, Dr. Daniel Eagle. He's an economist at the RAND Corporation. He's a professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School. His research uses qualitative and quantitative methods to study policymaking in fragile and instability-prone countries with a focus on development and stability-focused programming. He has extensive experience working in the Middle East and has produced a number of cutting-edge studies. He is leading an effort supported by the New Levant Initiative to build on the World Bank study by creating a user-friendly calculator that will allow anyone to see the real-world impact of economic integration under different scenarios, and we'll get into all of those subjects today. Let me begin with the first question for Isabel. You are the lead author of the World Bank's report, Over the Horizon, A New Levant. And in that report, you talk about the untapped potentials. Can you elaborate, what are the most important policy changes that governments should be making for those untapped potentials, and what is the region forfeiting as long as those policies are not being implemented?
Sure, thank you, Andrew. Indeed, economic potentials are very high in the Levant, but countries do not take advantage about from these opportunities, which can stimulate growth and create jobs. Limited integration so far undermined the Levant region's ability to tap into its significant economic resources. The World Bank report, Over the Horizon, A New Levant, quantified and identified these potentials for every country and came up with policy options for the government. And also it took a vision for the whole region for the future. Technical work was done by a large, excellent team from the IFC, World Bank, and in very close collaboration with the private sector from the whole region, the government leaders, and the academia. And some of my team members are here who contributed significantly to this work. Our team showed that any investment done in this region will bring high outturns, and these are all quantified in the report. The challenges are high, but economic potentials are there. The New Levant and our efforts are about creating economic opportunities for all populations in the region through better regional collaboration and cooperation. Because we know that, and the literature shows very clearly, that sub-regions grow faster together rather than bilateral efforts. With the New Levant, we are talking about a regional vision and an economic development program for the future. The results of our analytical work show that economic integration is a positive sum game for all countries in the Levant. It's a win-win situation for the whole region. The countries in the region show strong economic complementarities and present great potential for a successful economic integration. Indeed, when we look at Trade Complementarity Index worldwide, we see that the index levels in the Levant are comparable to those countries that historically formed economic integration in the past, such as the EU. We are talking about, in the Levant, a combined population close to 250 million people and a nominal GDP of $1.4 trillion. This is a significant economic importance with proximity to major markets and access to transportation corridors. So where are these untapped potentials and what the countries can do to benefit from these? Large opportunities exist in energy sector, including electricity and gas, transport, customs, logistics, ICT, financial services, and tourism sectors. Currently, all countries in the region are under-trading with each other. This includes major economies like Egypt and Turkey. We observe that as Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey climb up their levels of comparative advantage, more labor-intensive industries are moving to lower wage countries. So we already observe this flying geese pattern in the region with a potential for future integration. Currently, the traditional sectors, such as food, textiles, garments, footwear, mineral goods are dominant in the region. Egypt is experiencing a growth in low technology industries. Jordan is maintaining export performance in various chemical products, and the good news is that the pharmaceuticals industry in Jordan has the potential to grow forward. And when we look at prospects, the countries show potential in modern manufacturing industries, except for Iraq, but services sector is also very critical. So far, services sector is mostly dominated by travel and transport, but from our analytical work, we saw that communication, financial services, insurance services are also showing rapid increase and potential to grow in the future. Jordan, Egypt, Turkey have comparative advantages in transport services. Lebanon has comparative advantages in the financial sector, along with construction and computer services exports. So why isn't the region benefiting from these potentials? In fact, this is the second worst region in the world in terms of benefiting from these potentials. And every day, countries and people lose billions of dollars from this. One powerful message to governments in the Levant region is that there's a high opportunity cost of not utilizing these economic potentials. And this means negative impact on job creation and negative impact for household incomes. The World Bank report quantified economic implications for a deeper regional integration. And we saw that only from reducing tariffs, lowering transport costs, and liberalizing services trade, the region can gain $30 billion, as we heard today from Cemal Daniel's speech. So the cost of inaction is high in the Levant. In addition, there's a lost output as a result of the regional conflict. When we looked at the numbers, we saw that in 2017, the regional nominal GDP was similar to 2012. This is particularly sad because we know that the previous decade, the region as a whole grew higher than 5%. So what are the important policy changes the governments should do? We classified these actions under 3 pillars. First, the policy reforms that should be done bilaterally. Second, regulatory convergence for the whole region. And third, major investment and infrastructure projects. And we are talking about multi-billion-dollar, multi-country investment projects for the whole region that will tap into potentials in various sectors. In an action plan, we identified these very specific, robust actions and what are these and what should be done by which government and also in partnership with the private sector. We identified actions under 2 groups. First, low-hanging fruits, the short-term actions that can be done now despite the political and security situation, and long-term vision that sees a deeper economic integration for the future when the political situation permits. The policy changes by governments should focus on eliminating binding constraints and behind-the-border barriers, because this is particularly important challenge for this specific region. The trade costs are high. The major issues are logistics, performance, and facilitation bottlenecks. In addition, non-tariff measures are applied to all product lines in trade. Services, trade policies are highly restrictive. For example, in Lebanon, has the highest level of restrictiveness in cross-border supply. So these are all affecting competitiveness. So with regards to policy actions, growth has to come from countries' productive capabilities. And eliminating binding constraints will help structural transformation, of course, because a promising sector in one country will not reach export performance if another country is applying restrictions, in the case of Jordan, for example. The big ticket items are in regional investment and infrastructure projects, and these have the potential to create jobs, especially for the refugees and IDPs. And we saw that there are clear projects that feasibilities are done in customs, logistics, transport, ICT, and energy sector projects. Regional connectivity is an important agenda item that includes transport and ICT services. There's a need to establish trade routes with faster handling and processing. The Iraq transport corridor project, for example.
Isabel, we gotta get
Sure.
Abdullah and the others in. So let us come back to some of the reforms. It's a fantastic start. Appreciate that presentation on the World Bank report and major contribution. Abdullah, also with the World Bank, you have the benefit of, you were a policy leader during Shamgun, which was a successful effort at economic integration in the Levant. And we know that the possibility for reform and change and steps toward integration can sometimes depend on the nature of governance. How did it work? What worked well in your experience, and how does it compare in your understanding to other efforts at economic integration that you know about, like in Europe and elsewhere?
Yes, let me say that during the decade before the Arab Spring, things were not, as one would imagine, very politically easy, and security situation was very difficult. I mean, the integration move, which was tremendous during those days, the increases in trade and investments, cross-borders activities, financial flows, and more even regulatory and convergence between the countries in the Levant was happening despite difficult political situations. You had the war in Iraq, you had the war in Lebanon, we had the whole Hariri situation affecting the region, you had the first Kurdish Arab skirmishes in northeast Syria. We had so many challenging political and security situations. Nonetheless, governments finally realized that integration produces tremendous gains. And in fact, I can say that the economic integration movement of those years happened despite the political and security situation. So what I'm trying to say, it's not hopeless. Let's not look at the situation now and say we are never going to have economic integration. The other point is, in fact, because of the terrible damage that occurred in our region, there is no way forward but through integration. If we think that each country alone can rebuild, we are mistaken. The name of the game is rebuilding through borders and cross borders. Just imagine if we want to rebuild the Aleppo power plant, which is destroyed now, 1,000 megawatt, it will take 5 to 6 years. Aleppo cannot live without electricity. Hooking the Syrian electricity network to the Turkish one will cost less than $5 million, something that used to exist before and can exist very easily. To bring up the Syria and Iraq cement production capacity to the required levels of, say, 30 million tons a year for Syria alone, that will take 25 years. But there is plenty of surplus cement production in the region that could be brought into Syria and Iraq very quickly. But answering also your point about what type of governance, again, we cannot claim that the governance structures of the countries in the region during those 10 years where integration was booming was the utmost desired governance frameworks we wanted. We knew all the difficulties that the governance systems in those countries are facing, and still, those countries managed to achieve higher integration, and they will be able to manage higher integration in the future, noting that there is no return to the old governance systems. In the reconstruction of those societies, we will have to adapt a more participatory, more open, more inclusive political and economic systems. So that's one. The other point I want to say that compared to other very successful integration experiences, take ASEAN, for example, ASEAN countries had very different levels of political systems, from totalitarian communist systems in Vietnam all the way to a very liberal, open systems in other countries. And still they managed to agree on their economic interests and their geostrategic interests. But that integration in itself is an engine for governance reforms. It will be a catalytic force for changing governance, open regulations, more transparency, more accountability in those societies. So it's going to be a virtuous cycle that we move from the current vicious cycle of violence and dictatorships into a virtuous cycle of governance reforms, reconstruction, and economic growth.
Thank you. Daniel, you're leading our effort at RAND that's looking also at economic integration in the region, picking up on the World Bank study. What have you found? I know the study is in a preliminary phase, but what have you found in your results so far with regard to this?
Right. RAND, like the World Bank, now is doing a study of the potential economic benefits of integration in the region. The study, which is a partnership with the new Levant initiative, has two parts. The first, which I'll summarize briefly here, is to provide an up-to-date, comprehensive understanding of the benefits of economic integration. The second, which we'll talk about in a minute, is a calculator that's designed to make those results accessible to businessmen, investors, and regular people, to demystify, if you will, the complicated economics. So we just finished the baseline analysis, and we found some really striking results, which again builds on the work of the World Bank and a lot of other folks that have been working on this. People from the region are also very active in understanding what benefit might look like. The headline result is that over the next decade, economic integration could add roughly $500 billion in new economic activity, which, I mean, very similar to the World Bank result, but really there's a lot of money on the table here. I mean, $500 billion, this is money that will go to the people, that will go to new businesses, a lot of opportunities for investors to take advantage of this. Very briefly, just to understand where it comes from, we, like the World Bank, find there's four kinds of benefit. There's going to be new opportunities for economic trade. There's going to be new opportunities for investment. This will be both internationally, but also locally. As businessmen from the region, investors from the region, instead of investing in Europe, instead of investing in China, invest locally to take advantage of the larger market. Because now Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, all a part of a partnership, there's a lot more opportunities for economics. $500 billion sounds like a lot of money. It also benefits the people a lot directly. The Syrians stand to benefit the most. Our estimates suggest that the average Syrian household will see $35,000 in new wealth over that decade. The Iraqis about 30,000, and then some of the other countries a little bit less, the Palestinians and the Lebanese about 15,000 each. So these are meaningful numbers. These are things that, I mean, numbers hopefully the policymakers will take on. We'll talk about that a bit more.
Thank you. Sybil, you were talking about some of the reforms or policies that need to be implemented that have not been implemented yet. Tell us just a little more about that, and then what about the private sector's role in economic integration?
So there are high potentials in the region to implement sectoral projects, and there are already efforts ongoing. And transport, ICT, customs, logistics services are showing big interest. And there's a great interest from the private sector leaders in the region. And in fact, it's very encouraging to see that this strong partnership from the private sector who rallied around the Levant vision. During our consultative missions, we all agreed that the vision for the future of the region should go beyond politics. Intergovernmental efforts were put on hold, but the private sector is willing to take the relay where diplomacy is failing. And there's a history behind this. The Levant private sector platform has a solid background. In 2010, Levant Business Forum was formed right after 4 governments in the region put a joint declaration of CNETAC, Close Neighbors Economic and Trade Association Council, with a view for a deeper economic integration for the Levant. The World Bank Group helped mobilize the private sector champions in the region in close consultation with the chambers of commerce in all countries. So there is already a very good platform to build on, and we are particularly very happy with our excellent partnership with the New Levant initiative. Puneet Talwar, Jamal Daniel, and their teams are doing an excellent job, and they are seeing this vision. And the World Bank Group is fully supportive of this. So the new approach at the World Bank, maximizing finance for development, entails leveraging private sector in a ways that to optimize the use of public resources. It's mainly for the investment and infrastructure projects. And efforts are going on. For example, this approach will be applied to Lebanon's $22 billion capital investment plan, including power sector reforms in Lebanon. Also, the bank is targeting projects in Jordan, such as Jordan Transport Project and Iraq reconstruction. In fact, in mid-February, we had a big conference in Kuwait. The World Bank co-chaired it about the Iraq reconstruction, and there was a strong interest from the international community. There was a total pledging of $30 billion, and this conference was very private sector heavy. So we already saw this strong interest from the private sector, and the message coming out from this conference was very clear. The region is open for business.
Good to hear. Abdullah, based on your experience in Syria with the UN, at the World Bank, and picking up on the studies, preliminary results we've heard from RAND, the study that's been done by the World Bank, what are the decisions that need to be made first? Where do you start? There are gains from trade, there are gains from investment, there are gains in numerous sectors that Sybil has laid out. How do you begin the process when you begin to think about the implementation of integration and picking up where you left off with Shamgan?
I can imagine a few parallel tracks. First of all, we have to use the World Bank convening power to bring authorities in the region around a policy simulation exercise using calculator like the RAND is developing. It's very important to make people accountable, to make governments accountable for that lost opportunity of not integrating. Knowing something makes you accountable, makes you responsible. They need to know, and they need to face that knowledge, and they need to be accountable for that. In parallel, I think the best thing governments can do and we can do is lift our hands off the private sector of the region. The private sector of the region, I'm as a son of Damascus, I can tell you that the concept of a Levantine integration comes natural. It's in the DNA. The problem is the suppressive and oppressive economic and administrative regimes in those countries' economies. The first starting point is to identify what are these key oppressors to economic enterprise, how to unleash that tremendous potential of ordinary people in the region for their integration. And the third one in parallel, there has been in the last few years, maybe the silver lining of all what's been happening in the region is that millions of people have been moving around, creating new networking opportunities, creating new knowledge. You may be surprised, but the poorest Syrian refugee in Lebanon in the past few years have gained new expertise, created new networks, and will go back home with those expertise and those networks. We can think, because reconstruction is going to happen bottom up in the region. If we think that we have $1 trillion to invest in big capital infrastructure projects, it's not going to be like this. We have to activate the economy of the region bottom up. Those millions of people who have been moving around are actually going to be the cementing factor that will bring those economies together. You will be surprised how much joint ventures for $2,000 or $3,000 are happening between a refugee in Zatari camp in Jordan and a Jordanian small enterprise. You may be probably aware that most of the wedding dresses in Amman today come from a Zatari camp through these joint little ventures. There is a road in a Zatari called Champs-Élysées where people from Amman try to bribe policemen to have access to go into Zatari camp. Those are probably the initiatives that would rebuild the region, and it can only be rebuilt as a Levant, not as Syria alone or Iraq alone. So probably these three tracks together would produce enough critical mass of change in the early stages of implementation of this vision.
Daniel, you've heard what Sibel and Abdullah have laid out about the next steps, the things that are necessary. Tell us a little about the calculator you're developing at RAND and how this can help in that process of evaluation and facilitating integration and the benefits that we see from it.
So the second part of our partnership with the new Levant initiative is building what we're hoping will be a calculator for Levantine economic integration. And the goal is twofold. There's really two audiences. One are the policymakers, and the second is the interested public. And how is it useful to these people? So if you think about the interested public, often they will read about economic integration. It sounds interesting, but they don't actually understand what it means. What is trade integration? How does that affect me? How does that affect the other people in the region? What the tool will do will be, it'll give them an opportunity to understand and sort of demystify, take apart these analyses. What's the relative benefit of investment versus the free movement of people versus regional infrastructure? How much investment will it take? It'll give opportunity for people to look at all these different aspects of economic integration. And again, as Abdullah was saying, to hold their policymakers, their governments accountable. These are the opportunities I'm missing by not having economic integration. For the policymakers, we hope it gives them a tool for doing policy analysis, for scenario analysis. What should Egypt be included in the economic integration? How should that be done? What is the benefit of trade integration, investment? How should we bring in investment? It gives them a tool for thinking objectively and systematically about what economic integration might look for them. We've done calculators before. We did one for Brexit, which we know is being used by the British government. We know is being used by the White House to understand the impact of Brexit. And we also did one for Syrian reconstruction with the World Bank, which we believe is also being used by the Syrian government to do that kind of objective analysis. Often, again, they do analysis that's very static. This allows them dynamic analysis, continuously up-to-date data to allow people to interface with the study. And it's really, I mean, the calculator is based very heavily on the World Bank study. What's effectively trying to do is take that really detailed, in-depth analysis and make it accessible to regular people.
And explain just briefly how you're able to vary the assumptions, because what you can do then is say investment in this sector at this amount could bring this benefit in terms of GDP or growth. You can measure what's needed. Explain a little more how that works.
Sure. I mean, there are many, so economic integration may look lots of different ways. I mean, there's a lot of different things on the table in terms of what integration will look like. How deep will free trade look? Will agriculture be on the table for integration? Within the EU, agriculture was always very complicated, very complex because there's domestic industries. What is the benefit for each country of complete agricultural integration? How about if there's just integration in trade in goods or just trade in services? It'll be able to allow people to take a look at the relative benefit of these different things. Should there be a common visa? Should people be able to move freely between these countries? It creates security concerns, as folks have mentioned. It creates governance issues. But what is the benefit of that? And allow people to do those trade-offs.
Sybil, you've heard about the calculator. We've been talking about the next steps. Tell us how you think these tools can be helpful to the World Bank in terms of your next steps, and what do you also see as necessary to move ahead?
Next steps are very clear from the World Bank Group side. On Monday, the 2018 MENA regional update was discussed at the World Bank board. And one of the main priorities going forward is economic transformation with a focus on youth and gender. Regional cooperation is one of the priorities of the World Bank, and especially for the Levant region is the water, education, and energy the bank will be focusing on. Now, different pieces are moving towards a bigger picture, especially with the participation of the private sector and very heavy presence of the private sector, which will be very critical on the way forward. The new Levant vision has the potential to develop into a regional economic and social development agenda. When the political conditions permit, the regions will move towards a deeper integration, but even in the short term, tangible results can be achieved through cooperation. And with this good partnership with the private sector and mobilizing the private sector with the leaders here, we are seeing that the World Bank is also reviving plans to realizing the potentials in Levant. And we are also happy to see that the new research is building on the World Bank analytical work. The work conducted by RAND and especially the calculator will be very beneficial for the whole region. First, by quantifying potential impacts of economic integration, the governments will see that every country's contribution is taking the region to a much higher growth path. So this is a clear message. And this will help governments to work on regional strategies that is win-win for all. Second, households will see very clearly what is available to them and what actions will increase their income, what actions will improve their lives at the municipality level, where they live. And this will be particularly important for strengthening the social contract.
Very good. Let me go to Daniel on the next question. Isabel used the term win-win on economic integration. You know, when Rand does a study, we always, you know, we pride ourselves on being fact-based, data-driven, and always don't know the results before we start the study, and that's part of our ethos. But I think what our preliminary results have shown is there is a win-win in integration, and how a view of someone who's looked at integration models elsewhere compare this effort.
Yeah, and I think what's striking here is that all the countries will benefit. There will be a difference. I mean, the Syrians and the Iraqis will benefit the most, but all the countries, all the people of the region will benefit. This is not always the case with integration. Often when the U.S. will have a free trade agreement with another country, sometimes that other country may not always benefit, but because, and I think the World Bank lays out the potential for trade here. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot, their economies are prepared to integrate. I think because of that, the shared culture, the shared language, there's a unique opportunity here. We've seen this in some of the other regions. The European Union, of course, all the countries benefited. And I think that's what we're likely to see here, or what we saw with ASEAN, with the countries of Asia, where the integration lifted all of them. And that's what we're likely to see in the Levant.
Interesting. Abdullah, you said a few minutes ago, you referred yourself to, I think, as a son of Damascus. Tell me, reflect for us a little bit. You've been a policymaker, continue to be a policymaker on economic integration, reconstruction. You also know that region very well, given your life experiences there. Can you help us understand the connection between the concept of economic integration and the cultural ties and feelings of integration that we've been discussing here today?
First of all, if you look at any gravity model regarding intra-regional trade, it will show that language is the most powerful variable in determining the volume of regional trade. So that is automatically linked to cultural integration in the region. Secondly, I'd like to say that this region is much more integrated than the numbers show. Informal trade before the conflict and during conflicts was much bigger than what official numbers show. This is mainly because of a deficiency in our customs and statistics of systems. And if you compare, I don't want to be very technical, but if you compare take Syria's GDP from a national accounts point of view and then compare it with household surveys point of view, you will see that there's a big difference in the size of the GDP. That big difference is attributable mainly to cross-border informal activities, whether remittances from the region. If we only talk about formal trade, the region may not look very integrated. But if you look at culture, if you look at music, if you look at cuisine, if you look at tourism, it doesn't make any sense for a Chinese or an American tourist to come to Damascus and not visit Aleppo, Beirut, Amman, Petra, and Jerusalem. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make economic sense even, let alone cultural sense. So the cultural ties that link this region, as I said before, the idea that you are at ease in doing business between Aleppo and Latakia and Aleppo and Istanbul and Baghdad and the closest city to Aleppo in the Arab world is Mosul. It's not Damascus. So when we are now planning the reconstruction of Mosul in the World Bank, do we take that into consideration? Do we think that the future of Mosul and the future of Aleppo should be linked, because this is how you optimize the rebuilding of those two cities? The economy of Mosul has historically been the economy of the economic capital of North Iraq. Is Mosul still the economic capital of North Iraq? Does it have access to those fertile plains that we call Al Jazeera in the northeast of Syria and northwest of Iraq? If it doesn't have that access, Mosul will not be rebuilt to its previous glory. So those cultural cross-border dimensions are as important as hard economic and numbers in designing our future integration.
Very good. We're just about out of time, and I want to thank our panelists, Isabel, Abdullah, Daniel, for this fantastic discussion. Look forward to future work.